signal.
Okay.
And then your voice will carry. And
All
the
right.
screen.
All right. Okay.
Do you need a seconder for that motion? No.
I don't know, do we? I guess we do maybe. Is there a seconder on this? Diane Watson, or Diane French rather, I'm sorry. It went through quite well though. Yeah. So I will, okay. Welcome Kent Branch. Welcome to the Kent County branch of the Ontario Genealogy Society, the June meeting. Our meetings are recorded and live streamed. So if you don't want to do any talking, stay in your seats and enjoy the visit. The Ontario Genealogy Society has been preserving and promoting family history for over 50 years. There are 30 branches all across Ontario. The Ontario Genealogy website is www.ogs.on.ca. There is lots of information on their webpage about their annual conference, memberships, databases, and so much more. Our Kent branch is located at the main library on Queen Street on the second floor behind the McHugh's Research Room. We are open Tuesdays to Saturdays, 1 to 5 p.m. daily. Our library is run by dedicated and informed volunteers who can help you with your research. We have a newsletter that is sent out quarterly. We have monthly meetings here starting at 7 p.m. in September, and we run through until November and then start back up again in March. So with that saying, thinking about joining, now is the best time. You get it for $37 from June 1st to October 31st. You can join now and save yourself some money. Add this to an OGS where your member gets a member discount. Add this to the Kent branch of $15 and a 2015 discount. So the savings could be quite a bit. Here are some pictures from the OGS conference that was held in Barrie at the end of May. This is our Colleen and Donna sitting at the table in the market. There's Cindy too. I see her now, the light is glaring. And sitting in the marketplace. And you'll see that we've now got a new tablecloth for our meetings and so on when we go out to work with the public, and it's got our logo on it. So it's quite nice, and it doesn't show the dirt, which is a great thing when people get pens running off paper, so that's always nice. So the upcoming events is June 16th is our Kent Historical Society meeting. Mike Mortier from Timsville. To view his extensive collection of John Deere tractors, machinery, toys, and collectibles, and it's at 7 p.m. September 11th, 2015 is the Kent Branch OGS September meeting. It's a question and answer period at this time, and you can bring your questions and bring a friend, and we'll see if we can help you figure out what's happened to this long lost brick wall that you're into. October meeting is Kent Branch OGS, Follow the Trail. Hear about families along the Thames River depicted in Along the Thames River Barn Quilt Trail. And that's a very interesting quilt that they have. I've seen it. So tonight's presentation is Residential Schools by Geraldine Robertson. And I'd like to give you a few little words here about Geraldine. She's a survivor of 2 residential schools, Mount Elgin in Muncie and Mohawk in Brantford. She's been married and had her 60th anniversary in May of this year. She has had 4 children and adopted her sister's 2 children who were taken by the CAS. She has 7 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren. She's worked as a medical secretary for 34 years. Since retirement, has been volunteering at numerous events to educate Aboriginal and non-Aboriginals about residential schools and their impact. This has taken her to various points in Canada, from BC to Ontario and everywhere in between. She started with a group of others first to reach out to survivors so they could begin their healing journey. She went to classes in public and high schools to educate students and teachers in the Lambton Kent School Board and London School jurisdiction. She has been doing this work now for 20 years. I would like to welcome Geraldine.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Or have I? No. I got this turned the wrong way, maybe. That's it. There. Okay, now you can hear me for sure. Thank you. I did bring along my husband for support and my granddaughter, Heather. So they're here with us this evening, and I'm not used to live streaming, so that means there's no retakes, doesn't it? So if I goof up, I goof up. That's all there is to it. And okay, I'm, as the introduction says, I'm Geraldine Robertson, and I'm from Aamshinong First Nation, which is Sarnia, Ontario, the Chippewas of Sarnia. And I was born there, and I was there until I was 8 years of age when I was taken to the first residential school I had attended, which is Mount Elgin in Muncie, which is really not that far away from here. It's west of London, but east of here. So it's just somewhere in between here and London and not that far. And I didn't really mind attending that school because there were a lot of people from my own community at that school as well. So I wasn't alone. And but still you feel lonely because you're away from your parents. And I only was there for the one school term, and then it closed in 1946. So that was a short 9 months that I was there. Excuse me. And from there, I was back home at our own school on the reserve for 1 year. And then my father died, and my mother was taken into hospital with tuberculosis. So then the Indian agent sent me and my two sisters to Mohawk Institute. And this is the school you see here. It's a very impressive looking building, but when you're a child, it can be very, very intimidating as well. And when we got off the train in Brantford, the minister of that school came to pick us up. And for some reason, I just had an intuitive feeling that I was in big trouble. And it proved out as the story will go on. And I'll tell you a little bit about the history of residential schools and how they came to be. So, and we're going right back in early history, how Canada came to be really. And if ever you get the opportunity to watch the blanket exercise, it's really a wonderful teaching tool of our history, yours and mine. And it goes back to the King and Queen of Spain, as it says on the screen. And along with the Pope, the Vatican, they had a paper, which was a solemn edict. And they considered any empty lands that were not occupied by Christian people, then that was subject to discovery. And so this is how this country was identified as being non-Christian. And little did they know that we had a great system of acknowledging the Creator, of being a community. We had what is called the, excuse me, what we called, it takes a village to raise a child. And so we had a system where the children were the most precious in the whole community, and the grandparents were the honored ones. And the women, they were also honored and held in high esteem. And then we had the hunters, and they were also the protectors. So this is how our individual communities operated. And they had a system of governing that acknowledged each clan. There would be representation from each clan at the meetings that they would hold. So everything was done out in the open and in open fairness. And every family would have a clan that they belonged to, and my clan is the Turtle Clan. And so if there were any issues to be brought forward, they would be brought to a council meeting with all the different clans. But the children, everyone looked out for all of the children. You didn't have to worry because you had aunties and uncles, and they were sort of the mediators. If there was any dispute between the mother and father about the children, the aunties and uncles could step in and be the mediators. And oftentimes children will talk to someone else other than their parent to confide in. And this worked great for our community. And so we were not uncivilized. This is what the point I'm telling you, so you understand that we were not uncivilized people. Even though we did not speak your language, we had a language. Each, there were various languages. Ours was Chippewa under the Ojibwe dialect. And there were many other languages all across North America. So anyway, this began with the European discovery of this land, which we called Turtle Island, and began the colonization. And when they first arrived here, things were on a peaceful and friendly basis because they needed our help in surviving our extreme cold winters. Had it not been for our help, your ancestors would not have survived here. So it, and I think the people coming to this land, they found it very, once they got used to the climate and were able to survive on this land, they began to recognize that was a good place to live. And so it is. And anyway, as time went on, the government of Canada, they came out with the Royal Proclamation. And this is acknowledging that our Aboriginal people in North America, well, in Canada really, had title to our lands. So there was a lot of treaty making going on, and there was a lot of land being bought and sold, although our people didn't really understand the land was theirs, the land was ours, and the idea of selling and bargaining for, that was not our style. It difference of lifestyle altogether from what would be practiced over in Europe. And then the BNA Act came, and that would be John Macdonald's announcement that Canada's goal was to do away with the tribal system and to assimilate the Indian people in all respects with the inhabitants of the Dominion. So we were to become all English speaking, all practicing Christianity, Not that there's anything wrong with it, I'm not saying that. But the point I want to make is we did honor the Creator. We had ways of always opening our day with prayer and giving thanks to the Creator, and always at nighttime in the evening, always giving thanks for what we had. So it was easy to Christianize us because we already had the groundwork done, because that's what we practiced. Even though it wasn't called Christian, it was still it's just terminology, that's all it is. But anyway, the government, the Crown, they felt that they had to put us under protection. And so we became wards of the state. And wards of the state really makes you dependent, which was not our way at all. We were totally independent people. But in order to get as much of the land as they could, they brought in this V&A at the Indian Act to get rid of the Indians. And actually, under the Indian Act, we were even not allowed to vote until 1960. Now that's recent, very recent. And it just seemed like we were really controlled by the government, and there was a term called enfranchisement, where you could not go for higher education, you could not become a professional person, you could not join the armed forces unless you gave up your entitlement to being a First Nations person. So you would lose all your rights. And it wasn't until, I know in 1985, I was allowed to become an Indian again, because when I married my husband, who was non-Aboriginal, I had lost my status. But in 1985, the laws had changed and I was able to go back to being an Indian again. Now, that's so silly, isn't it? Being one day you're not and next day you are. So, but I've always held in my heart that, I am what I am, so, and you are what you are. So that's the way it goes, and that's how it should be. So, anyway, we became a real Indian problem in the 1900s, in the early 1900s. And by then the wars were over, when the United States were trying to take over Canada. The British people had First Nations people as their allies. And without us as their allies, we probably would be American, all under the American flag now. So this is a long way around getting to the residential schools, isn't it? But anyway, the schools, Mount Elgin started in 1849 and ran till 1946. And the Mohawk School started in 1827 and closed in 1970. But the most recent closing was out in Saskatchewan, and that school closed in 1996. So that is very, very recent, very recent. So the survivors out west are a younger generation than the survivors from this part of the country and east. A lot of us have died away. There's still some that are alive here, and I'm one of them. I'll be 80 this year. And up until about 4, possibly 5 years ago, I finally was able to not have any more nightmares. And I don't know, maybe I'll still get some periodically, but it's a real treat to realize I've gone this long without any nightmares. You know, it's wonderful. So that's what kind of an impact the schools have on children. And there are some people who can say that they've had positive experiences, but those are really few and far between. And I'm going to leave you with some literature about the two schools I attended. And I was just reading them through. And I thought to myself, these are not the schools I went to, because according to this, and it's put out by Aboriginal Affairs, Indian Affairs, so it says that we had extracurricular activities such as basketball, baseball, board games, brass pounding, hockey, skating, tobogganing, and weaving. Well, I don't know where I was, but I was working there. I wasn't involved in any of those. And the same with Mohawk Institute. And our extracurricular activities included basketball, Boy Scout Cadet Corps, football, Girl Guides, hockey, lacrosse, track and field, and volleyball. I do remember having Girl Guides, but of all of those listed, that's the only thing I remember participating in. And I wasn't just a little kid. I was in grade 6, 7, and 8 when I was there. So I would remember if those were available to us. And the Girl Guides I really intensely disliked, because all they did was scream and shout at us, giving us instructions. We never really learned anything useful, and to be working towards all the badges they expected us to. When you're being screamed at, you're not as apt to pay much attention, because they really are holding you in very low regard to begin with. So what is the point in trying to learn something that's foreign to us? So anyway, most of my time at Mohawk Institute was spent working. I went to school 3 hours a day, and the rest of the time from early morning, we would get up 6 o'clock and go to bed at 8. And 3 hours of school, and the rest of the time was working. So that belies the fact that, you know, we had all these extracurricular activities. So, and the problem with the residential schools is you become being raised in an institution, you lose any kind of parenting skills, because your role models are people who are punishing you all the time and screaming at you, so that these are what you learn. And they're not healthy ways of being. And many of us suffered from impoverished conditions. We were not very well fed. We were always hungry. This created an atmosphere of terror, really, because the older students would get after the younger students for food. So it was, you were living under terror from the supervisors and the minister and the older students. So that's how it went. And that was my experience at the schools. I'm not saying that everybody's experience was the same, but I've heard enough stories that of survivors that they did have this type of behavior all across the country. So it's not foreign just to the school I went to. And so we were not allowed to speak our language, so you lost contact with your language, with your culture. You didn't learn anything about your culture. You come out of there not knowing where you belong. And you'll see in the big cities a lot of Aboriginal people there. They more or less go there to just get lost because they don't know where they belong. And you don't really feel like you fit in when you go back home to your own reserve. I lost my connection with my mother, and it was all my own fault because I could not forgive her for sending us away. And it wasn't her fault. She had no control over that. This was the Indian agent who governed each reserve, and he was responsible for sending us away. But still, it impacts your family life with your own family when you go home. And it just is not a healthy atmosphere at all, because you come home with a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, and you have trust issues. So it goes a long way to undermining us as a people. One of the highlights of our nation was in 1969, when Pierre Trudeau, who was Prime Minister at the time, and Jean Chrétien, he was Minister of Indian Affairs, and he wanted to terminate our rights in the legislation, through legislation. So this mobilized our people to form what they call the National Indian Brotherhood, and now that is called the Assembly of First Nations. You've heard that term, Assembly of First Nations. And they defeated that white paper, so that was one of the highlights of our history. I'll let you continue to read what it says there. A lot of profit has been made from our lands, which has, depleted and polluted our lands without any regard for Aboriginal treaties and without any benefit flowing to our people. So that has been a very unfair way of doing business. And our suicide rate among the youth is 15 to 24 times, well, between 15 and 24 years of age, is 5 to 6 times higher than the national average. Now that is an extremely high rate. And the 25% of all the deaths among the youth is due to suicide. Our unemployment rate is extremely high. All our with the dam construction and oil and gas exploitation, it has ruined our land and poisoned the water. You should be aware that those were highlighted in the newspapers. There's always been this assimilation process, and we've resisted that. We have been punished, of course, for resisting that, and in the way of being compensated in our treaty agreements and in the land. And we're still viewed from the Harper's government as the Indian problem. So, this goes on and on and on. And at some point in our history, it has to stop. So, I'll let you read what this says, and I'll go to the next slide in a moment. And, if we agree to never assert our rights, This is tantamount to extinguishing those rights. So we have to fight for what we have. The surprising thing, at least to me, it seems very surprising, but maybe to most people in the land, maybe it's not a surprise. But when the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, there were 4 countries in the world that opposed the declaration. 11 countries abstained. Those who opposed were Canadian government, United States, Australia, and New Zealand. And those are countries with high Aboriginal people living there. So I know Kairos, one of the organizations in our land, and they are fully supported by various churches across this land. They are really bringing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to the forefront. So all Canadians begin to understand, what does that actually mean? And this is so funny, regarding the Declaration of Rights. Chuck Strahl, at that time, was Minister of Indian Affairs, and it's his business to be as Indian Affairs Minister. He's to see that things go right for our nation. But he made this statement, and it was in the newspapers. It said that the International Human Rights Instrument for Indigenous People would threaten the rights of non-Indigenous people. Now, how, that is so ridiculous. It's such a ridiculous statement that a man of high power would say that. It does not it has no bearing on the rights of non-Indigenous people. It has a great bearing on our rights as a people. We become recognized then as a people rather than subordinate. It's so wrong. It's quite extraordinary. But this is quite small print. I hope you can read it all right. Well, it's good, big up there. You can read that. So, but this is a very important document, this Declaration of Rights. It is extremely important for Canada to come to terms with it and for the government to finally acknowledge it. They still haven't fully acknowledged it. They're getting there, but it's slow. Is it okay to change the screen? Have you read it all? Shake your head. Okay. All right. Anyway, it's again more about the United Nations and the rights, the pressing human rights problem. And at some point in our history, it will become resolved, I'm sure. We once the people of Canada, who are also treaty people, it's not only First Nations people who are treaty people, it's everybody living in Canada. You are also all treaty people, because way back, the government was speaking for the people of Canada when they signed all these treaties. And so these treaties are still acknowledged today, even though they are not honored, but they are still acknowledged that they exist. And it's up to the people of Canada to assert their rights, to speak to the government and their representatives. We each have representatives in our provinces, and it's through the help of the people of Canada that the government is going to finally do justice. And it's going to come back to everybody in Canada. If there's enough people that speak up that we should all be treated fairly and equally, then the government has to listen. I guess that's all of that. But anyway, it's the residential schools have really done tremendous harm to First Nations. And this has streamlined back into society because the jails are the highest percentage of people in the jail system are First Nations people. So it's a strain on the taxpayers' dollars operating these jails. If we had an equitable system in Canada and fairness, you wouldn't see such a high percentage. Murdered women in Canada, that's been highlighted a lot recently. I think with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they've recognized that a lot of that stems from the residential schools, in that when you come out of those schools, you have very low self-esteem of yourself as a person. And then when you start bringing children into the world, those children also, it goes down generation to generation. It doesn't stop with just the survivor. It carries on. And that legacy of residential schools is still very alive in our communities. And this is why I started speaking up. In our community, I started there first. I went to Chief and Council, and I explained to them the treatment we received and the programs that were being offered in our communities to become a healthy and human being. Really, they were sort of Mickey Mouse programs that they were offering. It really didn't meet our needs. And so they formed an ad hoc committee to start researching. And they came to the same conclusions as what I had been telling them, that all of that mistreatment has come back down to raising our children. And so they have started parenting classes. They do self-esteem building for the children. They have right to play activities for the certain age groups. And so they have lateral violence workshops to inform the community what lateral violence means, because that's very prevalent too. And so they are beginning to deal with the issues, and it's going to take time, but we ourselves have to do that work. And for someone else to come in and say, this is what you need and this is how you're going to do it, somehow that doesn't work. If we have it under our own control, we're helping ourselves through the healing process. And when you help yourself, that's the most instructive way of overcoming your trials and tribulations. So I am really pleased to see things going the way they are. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission have presented a document with 94 recommendations of what we need to do in this land, and what the government needs to do, and what the people of Canada need to do. And I can leave the the website that you get copies of this, because it is very, very, they've been working on this for a good 5.5 years. And it is a very powerful document Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada
Could
calls
you
to
read-
action.
Could you read the website out?
Okay, yes. Website is www.trc.ca, or you can email at info@trc.ca. You can also fax them 204-984-5915, or you can call toll-free 1-888-872-5554 to get copies of this document. And it's 94 recommendations how should we proceed in Canada. And it is very enlightening. I think it's well worth the read, and I want to leave with you also the response of the churches to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And this was signed June the 2nd, 2015. So that was just less than a couple of weeks ago. And I went to that event, and all of these churches that are named on this back page have all signed and agreed what they would do. And I'm going to leave this, and you can make copies to distribute to your members. It's we need to get started. Canada needs to get started in a healthy relationship with all its people. And we have a great influx of people coming in from other countries who also need to learn the history of Canada. And I hope that they will be teaching that. And that would be one of the recommendations that the TRC commissioners have presented, is that new Canadians be taught our history. And the schools, they want the school books updated so that our history is correctly presented. There's very little in the textbooks, and this is why they would have us do presentations at the schools, but it wears you down doing it time and time and time and time again, and I've just gone over the highlights tonight. I usually go into it in more detail about our treatment at the schools so the students would know. And I think I'm probably running out of time now.
No, you're fine. You're good.
But I just want to leave you these resources so that
Okay.
your membership would be informed.
Thank you.
And I think what the three commissioners, Justice Murray Sinclair, Marie Wilson, and Willie Littlechild, who were the three commissioners for Canada, I think they have done a wonderful job. And I think they should be really well commended for the work that they have done.
Are there any questions?
Yes, I wanted to ask, our school year is 10 months. Is a residential school 10 months or 12 months?
Well, usually 10 months of schooling.
Yeah.
And summertime, the students would go home if they had parents or relatives that would take them. Otherwise, there were children that were still left there year round, year after year, and never saw their parents.
That's sad.
It is very, very sad.
No, I just didn't know. You didn't mention whether it was 10 months or 12 months that you were there.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Over the, what was 140 years or so, was there, no joking, over the 140 years or so of residential schools, were there better times, worse, were better periods, I guess be better to say, or worse periods of things like abuse, or lack of trust, all that sort of thing?
I would hear from, I didn't realize that my father went to residential school. He was sent out to Brandon, Manitoba. My grandfather went to residential school, but they never ever talked about it. And when I moved back to my community in 1995, there was nobody talking about it. They didn't. So it's hard to say, and I am suspecting that it was worse times all the way through for all of us. You know, and actually, back in the 1600s in Quebec, the Jesuits actually started schools there. So it goes back a long, long way. Yeah. There were some other hands up.
What kind of work did you do?
Well, when I first went there, I was a dishwasher. And then they put me in the sewing room. I was kicked out of that because I kept breaking the needles, so I was no use there. And then I had to serve the staff their food. And their food was so totally different from what we got. It was, they had gourmet meals in comparison to what we had. And so I know for a fact that they were well fed and they got wonderful, delicious food, and it smelled so tempting. It was torture working there to see what they got compared to what we had. And then after that, my longest work time was in the kitchen preparing food for the students. But there were often mouse and rat droppings in certain foods. There were maggots, and they still serve that food regardless. Yes.
One thing you referred to is when you arrived, I believe it was at the Muncie
Yeah.
School, that you thought you were in trouble.
Well, that was at the Mohawk School.
Mohawk.
Yeah, that was run by the Anglican Church. And not to put down anybody who's Anglican here, but he was a real mean, miserable soul. He really was. I used to be sent to his office all the time for strappings. And if you've ever had the opportunity to view a movie called Front Runners, it was showing on CBC just last week. And no, longer than that. And the one showing last week was called Absolutely Canadian. And but this is a story about people out west in BC. But I've forgotten, what was your question?
Well, you're referring to, you had a feeling when you arrived
Yes.
there.
Okay. It, I don't know, I have a high intuitive sense. And when I meet people, I know usually right away that I need to keep away from them. And he was one, but yet I couldn't avoid him because you're in this building together, and I was always being called up to his office, and it was always for strappings. I read a letter when I was doing research. Just a few years ago, I went to Ottawa and looking up the files before they closed all the files down. So before we started the class action suits. And I read a letter from the minister at that school asking if he could increase the corporal punishment. And the response from Ottawa was, no, you cannot. You may only strike a child 4 lashes. Well, I used to get 10 to 15 lashes on each hand every time. So he went far over and above and exceeded the legitimate punishment. And that he wouldn't be the only one. There were other ministers that did the same, other denominations, and it was, the pay was poor, so it lended itself to hiring people who were probably not fully qualified for the jobs and allowed for predators easily to come into situations like that. Yes.
Geraldine, just to ease your pain a little bit, I also got it on each hand
Yeah,
at my country school.
yeah. But how many times?
5 on each hand.
You were lucky I got twice that, 3 times that amount.
After the third time, you didn't feel it.
Well, I used to almost pass out with the pain. It took all my inner strength to keep my wits about me, to not faint. It was that painful. So, and if I was afraid of him, I didn't know what would happen to me if I should not be cognizant of what was happening. So.
You probably didn't deserve it, but I did.
No, I don't think I deserved it because I did my duties. I didn't cause trouble, and I don't know why. And I used to think that it was because he wanted to break my spirit. That was my thinking. But once we started our class action suit and we were talking, there were a great big huge group of us survivors, and listening to their stories, I began to realize that that minister was he preyed on students. So I don't know, I didn't have that experience with him. I did have an unfortunate incident at the school, and I think that's what has caused my nightmares all these years. But they are, you know, they have gradually gotten less and less till, as I say, it was 4 or 5 years ago since I've had my last nightmare.
The other day, we heard a gentleman that was a First Nation, but he didn't realize this till later years, and he was in the public school system.
Yeah.
But he had to be put at the back of the room. So they weren't treated well either in the public
No,
school, I gather.
no, they weren't.
Would there be many of them in the public system, or were they more
Well,
in the residential?
in Sarnia, they amalgamated in the 60s where they started going to school in the city. Up until then, I know our reserve had a school on the reserve, but then maybe it was back in the 50s they amalgamated them into the public school system. And there were a lot of fights, apparently. I wasn't part of that because I was at residential school then.
You answered my question. My question was about not all Native children went to residential schools.
That's right.
And just under special circumstances,
Yeah.
they were
Well,
taken away.
the one she was referring to, he didn't realize he was a First Nations person until he was in his elder years. So his family, a different family raised him, and they never shared that information with him. So he never knew he was a First Nations person till he was in his upper 50s or early 60s.
But the school system did.
Yes, they obviously did know, yes. So, and I know when I went to high school, I started high school in Sarnia, and the students were not very nice to us there either. So there were apparently many fights. I didn't get into fights, but they used to make fun of me, and every time we finished gym class, we'd all go into the change room. Soon as I entered, they would all stop laughing. So I knew they were talking about me. And I got very angry because I had just come out of a bad situation at residential school. And then now I'm going to have to cope with this in high school. I couldn't take it. So I told them, I know that you're laughing at me. I said, but remember this, you have parents who look after you. You have a roof over your head. You have food on the table. You have hydro. You have heating. You have electricity. You have everything that I don't have. If you feel you have to make fun of me, then go ahead. But it's not shame on me. It's shame on you. So.
That's okay. Is there any more questions? Well, on behalf of the Kent Branch of the Ontario Genealogy, I want to thank you so much for your wonderful speech that you gave this evening. It was very enlightening and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.